She didn't cry. She didn't argue. Sophie was 4 years old, and 4-year-olds don't usually know how to build a wall, but somehow in the space of one afternoon, she had built one around herself, and I was standing outside of it, knocking, and she wouldn't even turn around. "Sophie, baby, give me your hand, we're crossing the driveway." She looked at the pavement instead of at me, her small fingers curled into her own sleeve. "I can do it myself," she said. That sentence should have meant nothing. Kids say it all the time, but there was something underneath it, flat, careful, rehearsed, that made the hair on my arms stand up before I understood why. I didn't know yet that my own sister had spent the last 3 weeks whispering into my daughter's ear that I wasn't her real family. I didn't know that Sophie had heard every word of it and had decided in her own small and devastating way that she was going to protect me before I even knew I needed protecting. That knowledge was still 40 minutes away. Right then, all I had was a 4-year-old refusing to hold my hand and a feeling in my chest like something had cracked open and I hadn't heard it happen. By the time she stood up in front of the entire family later that evening and said the words nobody expected, I would already be unraveling. But I want you to understand how we got there, because the ending only makes sense once you know the beginning. My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm 34. I teach 2nd grade at a public elementary school in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I have spent my whole adult life being told in one way or another that I was too patient, too soft, too willing to keep the peace. My ex-husband said it the week he left, that I absorbed everything instead of fighting back. My sister has said it my whole life, usually right before she took something from me. Sophie is my whole world. She has my dark hair and her father's stubborn chin. And after the divorce, it was just the two of us in a small rented house on Selwyn Avenue, closer to my parents than I probably should have lived if I'd known what was coming. My sister's name is Melissa. She's 38, married to a man named Gary who sells commercial real estate and talks about it at every holiday like it's the only interesting subject in the world. Melissa has always been the one who got there first to graduate, first to marry, first to buy a house with a circular driveway in Ballantyne. I used to think that made her happy. I understand now that it only ever made her hungry for more. That Saturday was my mother's 70th birthday. The whole family had gathered at my parents' house in Myers Park, the house I grew up in, the house my father built his accounting practice from, the house that, I would later learn, held more secrets than birthday candles. I noticed the coldness almost the moment we arrived. Sophie, who used to run straight for my mother's rose bushes, stood glued to my leg. When my mother bent down to hug her, Sophie hugged back, but her eyes flicked toward Melissa first, like she was checking for permission. I told myself it was nothing. Kids get shy. Kids have moods. Then, an hour into the party, I walked into the kitchen to refill a water pitcher and heard my sister's voice on the other side of the pantry door, low and sweet, the tone she used to use on me when we were girls and she wanted something from me without asking outright. "You know your mommy isn't really your family the way grandma and grandpa are, right, sweetheart? Not blood family, not the same as us." I stood frozen with the pitcher in my hand. "She's just the lady who takes care of you. That's not the same thing, but it's okay. You still have all of us." I pushed the door open so hard it hit the pantry shelf. Melissa startled backward, a smile already sliding into place, the fast, practiced smile of someone who has been caught but refuses to admit it. "Rachel, we were just talking about the cupcakes." Sophie was staring at the floor. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Melissa either. She looked at nothing, the way children look when they're trying to disappear. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab my daughter and drive home and never come back to that house again. Instead, because I'm the person who has spent my whole life keeping the peace, I said only, "Sophie, go find Grandma. I need to talk to your Aunt Melissa." She left without a word, and that was the first time I understood that whatever was happening in that kitchen had already been happening for a while, that this wasn't the first whisper, only the first one I'd caught. "What did you just say to her?" I asked, my voice shaking in a way I hated. "I didn't say anything that isn't true," Melissa said, arranging cupcakes on a tray like we were discussing the weather. "You're not blood, Rachel. It's not an insult, it's a fact." I need to explain something here because it matters for everything that comes after. I'm adopted. I was 3 months old when my parents brought me home. My biological mother had died in childbirth, and my father, a much younger man then, freshly married, already the father of a 2-year-old named Melissa, had made the decision, along with my mother, to adopt me as their own. They never hid it from me. My mother used to tell it like a fairy tale, the day we got the best gift of our lives. I grew up knowing I was adopted, the way some kids grow up knowing they were born in a certain hospital. It was a fact, not a wound.
Until my sister decided to turn it into one. "You've never said it like that before," I said. "Why now? Why to my daughter?" Melissa set down the tray. For just a second, less than a second, something flickered across her face that wasn't confidence. It was gone before I could name it. "Because things are changing, Rachel," she said, "and you should probably start preparing yourself." She walked past me, back into the party, leaving that sentence hanging in the kitchen like smoke. I didn't understand it yet. I thought it was cruelty for cruelty's sake, an old grudge finding a new target. I had no idea my sister had already spoken to a lawyer 3 weeks earlier. I had no idea my father's estate, the accounting firm, the house, the trust he'd quietly built over 40 years, had a clock running on it that I couldn't see. I only knew that my daughter wouldn't hold my hand and that my sister had just told me, in her own way, that this was only the beginning. I found out later that night from my mother that Dad hadn't been feeling well. Chest pains, dismissed as heartburn, an appointment scheduled for the following week that he never made it to. My father died 11 days after that birthday party of a heart attack in his study, at his desk, surrounded by folders he'd been quietly organizing for months. I did not know, standing in that kitchen holding a water pitcher, that grief and inheritance and a 4-year-old's broken trust in her mother were all about to collide in the same 6 weeks. I only knew that something in my family had shifted and that I was the last one to notice. My father's funeral was on a Tuesday in October, cold enough that everyone wore coats they didn't usually need in Charlotte. Sophie held my hand that day. Grief, I think, makes children forget their new rules, and I clung to that small victory like it meant something, had healed. It hadn't. It was only a pause. The reading of the will was scheduled for 3 weeks later at the office of my father's longtime attorney and old college roommate, a man named Thomas Wren. I remember my mother mentioning him once, years ago, as the only person your father trusted with everything. I didn't understand at the time how literally she meant it. In those 3 weeks, Melissa changed. She started showing up at my mother's house more often, always with Sophie in mind, always with some excuse. I brought her a coloring book. I thought she might want to see the old photo albums. I told her some stories about our childhood. Each visit sounded innocent in isolation. Together, they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. Melissa was building something with my daughter, brick by brick, and I was being deliberately kept outside the room while it happened. The second time I caught it directly was at my mother's house, 2 weeks before the will reading. I'd stepped outside to take a work call, a parent conference I couldn't postpone, and when I came back in, Sophie was sitting on the couch next to Melissa, looking at an old photo album. "That's Daddy Bennett," Melissa was saying, pointing to a picture of my father as a young man, holding Melissa as a baby. "And that's me, when I was your age. And that's your mommy." She flipped the page. "The day she came to live with us. See how much older she looks than me in this one? She wasn't a baby like me. She was already 3 months old when she arrived." "From somewhere else?" Sophie asked. Melissa's eyes lifted and met mine over my daughter's head. She knew I was standing there. She had known, I think, before I even walked in. "From somewhere else, sweetheart," Melissa said softly. "Not from Grandma's tummy, like your mommy explains it to you. From somewhere else entirely." I crossed the room and took the album gently from her hands. "Sophie, why don't you go help Grandma set the table?" Sophie slid off the couch and left without protest, without looking back at either of us. A small, careful child navigating a war she hadn't started and didn't understand. "You need to stop," I said when we were alone. "I'm not lying to her. You're twisting a true thing into a weapon. There's a difference." Melissa stood, smoothing her skirt, and I saw again that flicker, maybe fear or something adjacent to it, quickly buried under composure. "You should talk to Mom about the trust before you get too comfortable playing the wounded party," she said. "Things are more complicated than you think." "What trust?" I asked. "Task Thomas Wren," she said, and walked into the kitchen, leaving me standing in my mother's living room with an old photo album and a question I couldn't yet answer. That night, I did something I am not proud of. I sat in my car outside my own house for 20 minutes after Sophie fell asleep in the back seat, and I cried the kind of crying that comes from exhaustion more than sadness, the kind where your body just needs to let something out because it has been holding too much for too long. I didn't know yet what the trust was. I didn't know my father had spent the final year of his life quietly restructuring his estate specifically because of a conversation he'd had with Melissa's husband, Gary, about streamlining the family assets. I didn't know that my sister had already met with 2 estate attorneys of her own, a woman named Patricia Ford, to explore what she called clarifying the distribution given certain complicating factors regarding the adopted daughter's legal standing. I only knew that my daughter had stopped holding my hand, and that somewhere in my family a plan was already moving that I could not yet see the shape of. The will reading was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in Thomas Wren's office downtown, a converted brick building near the courthouse, with tall windows and the particular hush of a place used to delivering news that changes lives.
I arrived early. Sophie was with my mother's neighbor for the afternoon. I hadn't wanted her anywhere near whatever this was going to be. Melissa arrived 12 minutes late, Gary trailing behind her in a suit that looked pressed for the occasion, and I understood, watching them walk in together like a unit, that whatever was about to happen had been rehearsed. Thomas Wren was in his early 70s, silver-haired with the kind of steady, unhurried voice that made you trust him before he'd said anything of substance. He'd known my father for 46 years. He had also, I would come to learn, known me since I was 3 months old, because he was the attorney who finalized my adoption. "Before I read the will," Thomas said once we were all seated, "I want to say something, because I think it matters, and because your father asked me to say it exactly this way if the moment ever came." Melissa shifted in her seat. Gary crossed his arms. "Your father loved both of his daughters equally," Thomas said, looking directly at me, then at Melissa. "I told him that more times than I can count over the years. But in the last 18 months, he became aware that someone in this family was attempting to draw a legal distinction between his biological daughter and his adopted daughter in anticipation of his death." The room went very still. He didn't tell me who, though I have my suspicions, and I imagine you all do too. What he did tell me was to make absolutely certain, in writing, with witnesses, notarized twice, that no one would ever be able to use Rachel's adoption to reduce what she was owed. Melissa's face had gone pale in a way I had never seen her before. Not embarrassed, not caught, afraid. "I don't know what you're implying, but I never—" "Melissa," Thomas said gently, "I have the letter your attorney sent inquiring about the legal standing of adopted children under North Carolina inheritance law as it applies to family trusts established prior to a formal adoption decree. Your father received a copy of that letter 4 months before he died because your attorney's office is required to disclose certain inquiries when a trust document is involved, and he was the trustee. He read it at his desk. I was on the phone with him 20 minutes later." I felt the floor tilt slightly under me, not from vindication, not yet, from the sheer, cold understanding that my sister had gone looking for a legal loophole to erase me from my own family, and that our father had spent the last months of his life quietly making sure she couldn't. "This is a misunderstanding," Gary said, speaking for the first time. "Patricia was just exploring options. That's what estate attorneys do." Patricia was exploring how to argue that Rachel's inheritance could be classified separately and potentially unequally from Melissa's, on the basis that adoption does not carry the same legal weight as biological descent in certain older trust structures. Your father found that letter and its implications extremely troubling, which is why the current will and trust, updated 4 months ago, contain language specifically closing that door, permanently, irrevocably. He opened the folder in front of him. The house, the firm, and the remaining assets are to be divided equally between Rachel and Melissa, not because I am telling you to, because your father wrote it that way twice with his own hand after learning what he learned. I didn't look at Melissa. I couldn't. I was staring at the folder, at the sight of my father's handwriting on a page I hadn't yet been shown, and thinking about all the nights in the last year he must have sat at that desk, quietly building a wall around me, without ever once telling me it needed to be built. "There's one more thing," Thomas said, and something in his voice shifted, became heavier. "Your father recorded a short video statement 2 months before he passed to accompany this reading. He asked that it only be played if, his words, Melissa tries to make this difficult." He turned a laptop toward the room. My father's face filled the screen, thinner than I remembered, sitting in his study, the same study where he would die less than 2 months later. "Rachel, Melissa, if you're watching this, it means I'm gone, and it also means Thomas thought it was necessary to show it, which tells me something happened that I hoped wouldn't." His voice was steady, tired but steady. "Rachel, I want you to hear this directly from me, not from a lawyer, not from your sister. You are my daughter. You have been my daughter since you were 3 months old, and I held you for the first time in a hospital hallway in Winston-Salem, and you grabbed my finger and wouldn't let go. Blood never had anything to do with it. I need you to know that, because I suspect someone in this room has tried very hard to make you doubt it." I was crying by then, silently, my hands pressed against my mouth. "Melissa," he continued, and his tone changed, gentler but firmer, "I love you too, and I always will, but I know what you've been doing. I know about the calls to Patricia Ford. I know because you're my daughter, and I raised you, and I know exactly how you sound when you're building a case for something. I'm not angry, I'm disappointed, and I'm asking you, while I still can, to stop. Whatever this is about, money, fairness, old resentments from when you were a little girl and I brought home a baby that wasn't yours, I need you to let it go. Your sister has done nothing but love this family. Don't make me the reason you lost her." The video ended. The room sat in a silence so complete I could hear the traffic outside on the street below. Melissa stood up first. Her hands were trembling. "He didn't understand," she said, to no one, to everyone. "He never understood what it was like." What was like?" I asked. It was the first thing I'd said in 20 minutes, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. She looked at me, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, my sister's face wasn't performing anything. It was just tired and old and cornered. "Being the one who was supposed to be enough," she said. "And then you arrived, and suddenly there were 2 of us, and I was 7 years old, and nobody asked me if I wanted a sister. I just got one. And Dad loved you so easily, Rachel. It never took him any effort at all." "That's not my fault," I said quietly. "I know that," she snapped. "I've known that my entire life. That doesn't make it easier." She walked out of the office without another word. Gary followed, throwing an apologetic look toward Thomas that fooled no one. I sat there for a long moment after they'd gone, my father's face still fresh in my mind, and I understood that this, the will, the trust, the video, was not the end of anything. It was the moment my sister realized she had already lost the legal war, which meant the only battlefield left was my daughter. I want to tell you I saw it coming. I didn't, not fully. I thought, foolishly, that the will reading would be the end of it, that once the legal question was settled, Melissa would retreat, embarrassed, and things would eventually cool into the kind of distant politeness siblings fall into after a fight too big to fully repair. Instead, she got worse. In the 2 weeks after the will reading, Melissa began inviting Sophie over for what she called cousin playdates, always scheduled during times she knew I had parent-teacher conferences or grading deadlines, always arranged through my mother so that saying no felt like punishing my mother's grief instead of protecting my daughter. I said yes more times than I should have because I was exhausted and because some small, tired part of me kept hoping my sister's cruelty had burned itself out with the will reading. It hadn't. It had just gone quieter, and quieter is more dangerous. I found out what was happening during those playdates almost by accident 3 days before my mother's second gathering, a smaller one, meant to mark what would have been my parents' 45th anniversary at the same house where all of this had started. My Sophie's preschool teacher, Miss Alvarez, pulled me aside at pickup on a Wednesday. "Rachel, can I talk to you for a second? It's nothing urgent, but I wanted to mention it." My stomach dropped the way it does now whenever anyone says it's nothing urgent about my daughter. "Sophie said something in class today. We were doing a family tree project, just simple drawings, mummy, daddy, brothers, sisters, that kind of thing. And when it came time to draw you, she got very quiet and told me, and I'm quoting her exactly, 'I don't know if I'm supposed to put her as real or not real.'" I felt the ground shift again, the way it had in Thomas Wren's office, except this time there was no lawyer, no video, no father's steady voice to hold the moment together. Just me, standing in a preschool hallway, hearing that my 4-year-old had internalized a lie about her own family so completely that she didn't know how to draw me. I told her, "You're definitely real, and definitely your family, in every way that matters," Miss Alvarez said gently. "But I wanted you to know because it seemed like it was coming from somewhere specific." I thanked her. I don't remember driving home. I remember sitting Sophie down that night, kneeling in front of her on the living room rug, trying to find words simple enough for a 4-year-old and honest enough for the truth. "Sophie, baby, has someone been telling you things about me and you, about whether I'm your real mommy?" She looked at her hands. Sophie has never been a child who lies easily. She gets a particular stillness in her shoulders when she's holding something she doesn't know how to say. "Aunt Melissa says you didn't come from Grandma's tummy. She says that means you're not the same kind of family as her and Grandma and Grandpa. She said it's a fact, not a mean thing. But it made me feel funny." "What kind of funny?" "Like maybe I'm not really yours either, because I came from your tummy, but you didn't come from anybody's tummy that's in our family, so maybe I'm only half. I have taught 2nd grade for 11 years. I have sat with children processing divorce, death, and every kind of family complication a small heart can carry. Nothing prepared me for hearing my own daughter describe herself as half mine, half real, half safe, because my sister had decided erasing me was easier than examining 40 years of her own resentment. I held Sophie for a long time that night. I told her the truth, the way my parents had always told it to me, that families are built by love and choice as much as by blood, that I was hers completely, 100%, no halves, no fractions. She nodded along the way children do when they want to believe you, but aren't fully convinced yet, because an adult they trusted had already told them something different. And children, I have learned, weigh voices by how many times they've heard them, not by how true they are. I didn't confront Melissa that night. I did something instead that surprised even me. I started keeping a record. I wrote down every date, every conversation, every overheard comment. I asked Miss Alvarez, gently, if she would be willing to document what Sophie had said, purely as a factual account, nothing more. I began, without fully admitting it to myself, building a case. Not for court, not yet, but for my own sanity, so that the next time someone tried to tell me I was imagining a pattern, I would have proof that I wasn't. I did not yet know how soon I would need it. The anniversary gathering was smaller than the birthday party had been. Close family only, maybe 15 people, in my mother's dining room with the good china out and a photo of my father on the mantel, candlelit, still too soon after his death for anyone to feel entirely at ease. I almost didn't bring Sophie. Part of me wanted to leave her with a sitter and spare her another evening in that house. But my mother had asked specifically, gently, if her granddaughter could be there, and I couldn't find a way to say no without explaining everything, and I wasn't ready yet to explain everything to my grieving mother. Melissa was there with Gary. She was polished, composed, warm in a way that made my skin crawl now that I understood what the warmth was covering. She hugged me at the door like nothing had happened in Thomas Wren's office 3 weeks earlier. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I think Mom needs all of us together tonight." I said nothing. I had learned in 3 weeks to save my energy. Dinner was quiet, full of the particular careful conversation families have when there's a chair no one is sitting in, and everyone is very aware of it. Sophie sat beside me, picking at her food, glancing occasionally toward Melissa with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not fear, exactly, but something watchful. It happened during dessert. My mother stood to make a small toast, just a few words about my father, about the anniversary they would have shared, her voice thick with the kind of grief that doesn't announce itself loudly, but sits underneath everything. The room was quiet, glasses raised, and in that quiet, Sophie stood up on her chair. Nobody had asked her to. Nobody expected it. She's 4. She doesn't make speeches. "Sophie, sweetie, sit down," I whispered, reaching for her arm. She didn't sit down. "I have to say something," she announced, in the clear, unwavering voice small children use when they've decided something is important enough to interrupt grown-ups for. "Because Aunt Melissa keeps saying things, and I don't think they're true, and I don't like it anymore." The room went utterly silent. Melissa's wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. "Sophie," I started. "No, Mommy, I want to say it." She looked at Melissa directly, this 4-year-old girl standing on a dining chair in her Sunday dress, and her voice, though small, did not shake. "Aunt Melissa said Mommy isn't my real family because she didn't come from Grandma's tummy. But I heard Grandpa's video. Miss Alvarez showed me the nice parts on the tablet because I was sad, and Grandpa said Mommy grabbed his finger in the hospital and never let go. And that's the same thing I do when Mommy holds my hand. So I think that means we're the same. I think Mommy is my real family, and I think you were trying to make me stop loving her, and I don't want to do that anymore." Nobody moved. My mother's toast glass was still raised, forgotten. Gary was staring at his plate. Melissa's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. "I heard you in the kitchen at Grandma's birthday, and I heard you with the photo album. I didn't say anything because I didn't know if it was true, but I asked Mommy, and she told me the truth, and it's not what you said, and I don't think you should get to decide who my family is." She sat back down. She reached over and took my hand, the first time in nearly a month, and held it tightly, like she'd been waiting the entire evening for permission to do it again. I have never in my life been more proud of another human being. "She's 4, Melissa said, finally, laughing a thin, brittle laugh, looking around the table for support that didn't come. "She's confused. Kids repeat things they don't understand." "She understood enough," my mother said. Her voice had changed. I had never heard my mother sound like that before. Not angry exactly, but finished with something.
She understood enough to know her aunt was trying to take her mother away from her, piece by piece, in whispers, because she couldn't stand losing an argument about money to a sister she resented since she was 7. "Mom, I heard the video too, Melissa. I sat with your father while he recorded it. I watched him cry afterward because he knew what you were doing and he didn't know how to stop it without breaking this family apart. And now, I've watched my 4-year-old granddaughter do what none of the rest of us had the courage to do at that dinner table 3 weeks ago. She stood up." Melissa's composure finally cracked all the way through. She stood, chair scraping loudly against the floor, and for a moment I thought she might storm out the way she had at Thomas Wren's office. Instead, she stayed, hands pressed flat against the table, breathing hard. "You don't understand what it's like to spend your whole life being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who never needed extra attention, while everyone falls in love with the baby who arrived out of nowhere and needed nothing but to exist to be adored. I was 7. I didn't ask for a sister. I got one, and I watched Dad look at you the way he never looked at me, not because you did anything to deserve it more, but because you were new and small and easy to love in a way I apparently wasn't. That was never a competition to me. I didn't even know it was one to you." "That's exactly the problem," Melissa said. And for the first time in the entire evening, in the entire month, she didn't sound cruel. She sounded exhausted and old and like a woman finally putting something down she'd been carrying since she was a child.
The room stayed silent for a long moment. Gary reached for her hand. She pulled it away. "I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight," Melissa said, looking at me, then briefly at Sophie. "I don't think I deserve that yet, but I am sorry. Not for feeling what I felt. I can't help what I felt. I'm sorry for what I did with it. I used a 4-year-old to fight a fight that was never hers." "You did," I said. There was no comfort I could offer her in that moment, and I didn't try to manufacture any. "And you need to understand that I will protect her from this completely from now on. Whatever we rebuild between us, if we rebuild anything, it will not include you having unsupervised access to my daughter's understanding of who her family is. That's not a punishment. That's a mother doing her job." Melissa nodded slowly and sat back down. And for the rest of that evening, the conversation moved on to smaller things. The anniversary, my father, the ordinary mechanics of a family dinner limping back toward normalcy. But something fundamental had shifted in that room, and everyone at the table knew it. The weeks that followed were not a fairy tale. I want to be honest about that, because I think stories like this one sometimes promise a tidiness that real families rarely deliver. Melissa and I did not become close again. We are, as I write this, cordial, careful, respectful, occasionally warm, but permanently changed by what happened at that dinner table. She apologized to Sophie directly once, in my presence, in words a child psychologist I consulted helped me approve in advance. Simple, direct, without excuses. "I said something that wasn't true, and it hurt you, and I'm sorry." Sophie accepted it the way children do, completely, generously, without holding a grudge the way adults do, and I made my peace with the fact that my daughter's forgiveness would always be more available than my own. The estate settled the way our father had designed it, equal and unshakable, and Melissa never contested it again. I think some part of her had needed to lose that fight publicly, needed the humiliation of that dinner table before she could finally let go of 30 years of resentment she'd been carrying since she was a little girl who didn't ask for a sister. Sophie held my hand again from that dinner forward, really held it, the way she used to, without checking anyone else's face first for permission. It took a few weeks before the wariness fully disappeared from her eyes when Melissa's name came up. Trust, I have learned, rebuilds itself slowly in children, in careful, deliberate steps, and I did not rush it.
Some evenings now, I sit with Sophie before bed, and she asks me questions about my adoption, casually, the way she asks about anything else that interests her: where I was born, what my biological mother's name was, whether I ever wanted to find out more about her. I answer honestly, without flinching, because I never want my daughter to feel that any part of our story needs to be hidden or defended. Last month, at my mother's house, I watched Sophie draw a new family tree for a school project. She drew me first, in the center, a stick figure with brown hair and a big smile, and beside me she wrote, in her careful, uneven 4-year-old handwriting, "Mommy, real, forever." I keep that drawing in my classroom now, taped inside my desk drawer, where I see it every day before my students arrive. Because here is what I know now that I didn't know standing in my mother's driveway with a daughter who wouldn't hold my hand. Family is not a fact you inherit. It's a truth you build, moment by moment, choice by choice, held together by the people who refuse to let it come apart, even when they're only 4 years old, and even when the person trying to tear it down is someone who was supposed to protect it. Sophie held my hand the whole walk to the car that night. She hasn't let go since.